If this story grips you in the first 60 seconds, subscribe to K-Diaspora. You won't survive this alone. The countdown on the screen read 5 hours and 53 minutes. Adaeze Nwosu had not slept in 31 hours. She had not eaten since 7 the previous morning. She was sitting in a secure room on the 14th floor of a Seoul office tower, surrounded by 3 monitors showing data she was not supposed to understand. Amran, the most feared man in Southeast Asia, was watching her from the doorway, like she was the last thing standing between him and ruin. She was. Adaeze, stop watching me and get me the original trial submission files. I need the raw pharmacokinetic curves from the compound's approval application. Every page. He didn't move immediately. Kang Jihoon, the man whose name made government ministers rearrange their schedules, whose silence in a room felt like weather, looked at her with the particular stillness of someone recalibrating everything he thought he knew. Then he turned and made the call. She had 5 hours and 52 minutes to save his empire, using the one thing nobody in his world possessed, her mind. 9 weeks earlier, Adaeze Nwosu thought coming back to Korea would save her father. She had no idea it would nearly cost her everything else. Cross-subscribe to K-Diaspora. Stories this powerful deserve to be watched. Hit the bell icon so you never miss one. The gun was already pressed to her father's forehead before she had even finished crossing the threshold of the room. She did not scream. She had been taught her whole life that screaming was a luxury poor people could not afford. So she stood there, still, rigid, her fingers curled around the strap of the beaded bag her mother had left her. And she watched the scene unfold like something out of a nightmare she had never been allowed to have. The boardroom was on the 32nd floor of a Lagos tower, floor-to-ceiling glass, a table long enough to seat 20. All 20 seats were occupied. Men in dark suits, men with faces carved from stone, men who had swallowed their own humanity years ago and had no intention of ever spitting it back out. Her father, Chief Emeka Nwosu, the man who had once commanded entire rooms with nothing more than the sound of his voice, was on his knees on the marble floor. The man holding the gun was not even looking at him. He was looking at her, and on the table between them, anchoring a single sheet of paper, was a pen. Silver. Expensive. The kind of pen that had signed things that could not be unsigned. His name, she would learn later, was Kang Jihoon. She only knew his eyes. Dark, still, watching her the way a man watches something unexpected at the edge of his perfectly controlled world. Not with surprise, not with anger. And with something far more dangerous than either. Curiosity. He lowered the gun slowly. The room exhaled, except for Adaeze, who had not breathed at all since she walked in. Jihoon. Who is this? Man in suit. His daughter, sir. She wasn't supposed to be here. Jihoon. But she is here. He crossed the room toward her. 8, 9, 10 steps. And every step landed like a verdict. He stopped close enough that she could smell him. Cedar, cold air, something sharp underneath. But he studied her face the way a jeweler studies a stone pulled from the earth. Unhurried, clinical, and then, so quietly only she heard it. Jihoon. Your father owes me 400 million naira. He has been running for 3 years. And you walked into this room voluntarily. Her chin came up. Even then, Adaeze, I came to negotiate. Something shifted in his face. A flash of something that was not quite a smile but lived in the territory of one. Jihoon. Then sit down. She laid out her proposal. Numbers, projections. A restructuring plan drawn up in the taxi from the airport, handwritten, rough but logical. He read every page in complete silence. When he finished, he set it down and aligned the edges carefully against the table. Jihoon, I will cancel the debt, every naira of it, on one condition. Adaeze, what condition? Jihoon, you return to Seoul with me. Finish your scholarship. And at the end of the year, you marry me. The room was very, very quiet. She laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that died when she realized he wasn't laughing back. Adaeze, you don't know me. You've spoken to me for 20 minutes. Jihoon, I know enough. Adaeze, enough to buy a wife? Like a transaction? Jihoon, Your father's life has a price. You walked in here to negotiate that price. This is my counteroffer. Take it or leave it." He did not fidget. He did not look away. Behind her, she heard her father make a small broken sound. That sound, wretched, diminished, the sound of the man she had flown halfway around the world to protect, made the decision for her. Adaeze. Fine. He uncapped the silver pen and slid the contract across the table. She signed. She would see that pen again. She still did not know that yet. She had expected a cage. What she got was a penthouse on the 47th floor of a Gangnam tower. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Seoul spread below her like a city-sized answer to every question she had not yet learned to ask. There were guards. She knew they were there even when she couldn't see them. Men in dark coats who materialized whenever she moved beyond the perimeter. She tested the boundary on day 3. The message was clear. You are watched. You are protected. When the difference between those two things was a line she couldn't quite see. Jihoon himself was a contradiction she had not anticipated. In the boardroom, he had been terrifying. A man built from ice and consequence. Here he did not hover, did not interrogate her, did not perform the kind of ownership she had braced herself for. He simply existed, nearby, like a planet she orbited without being asked to. The first misunderstanding came in week 2. She had returned from the university lab, talking loudly on the phone with her research partner, walked past 2 of Jihoon's senior associates in the corridor, nodded, and kept walking. At dinner, Jihoon set down his chopsticks. Jihoon, my associates were in the middle of a sensitive discussion. Adaeze. They were standing in the hallway. If the discussion was sensitive, it should have been behind a closed door. Jihoon, you walked through without acknowledgement. Adaeze. I nodded. Yes, that is acknowledgement. Jihoon. In this context, when seniority is present, Adaeze. I don't operate on seniority. I operate on relevance. They weren't relevant to what I was doing. He looked at her for a long moment. Not irritation, recalibration. The look of a man who has been handed a tool he does not yet know how to use. Jihoon, in Lagos, when you walked into that boardroom, you did the same thing. Adaeze. The danger was obvious. Assessing it would have been redundant. He picked up his chopsticks again. She had the distinct sense she had said something that was going to live in him for a very long time. On the 10th night, a thunderstorm rolled in from the East Sea. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the bed and her knees pulled to her chest when the knock came. Not loud, not insistent. Just there. Jihoon. Adaeze. Adaeze. I'm fine. Jihoon. I know. I brought tea. The quiet sound of a tray being set down outside her door. Footsteps retreating. The tea was chamomile, the same kind her mother made. She did not know how he knew that. She drank it on the floor with the thunder rolling outside and told herself it did not mean anything. The chamomile tasted like home, and she hated herself a little for how much that mattered. The midnight jollof rice happened 3 weeks in. She was at the stove when he appeared. Yeah, Jihoon, what is that? Adaeze, jollof rice. You won't like it. Jihoon, how do you know what I'll like? Adaeze, you eat rice with no seasoning. Your entire refrigerator looks like a hospital cafeteria. I'm confident. The ghost of an almost smile crossed his face. Jihoon, you've been studying my refrigerator. Adaeze, I live here. I look at things. He stood and watched her cook. When she served the rice, she put a portion in front of him without being asked. He took one careful bite. To Jihoon, this is very good. Adaeze, don't sound surprised. Jihoon, I'm not surprised. I'm informing you. They ate in the midnight kitchen with the Seoul skyline glowing through the windows, and she thought, this is the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. And she had lived a fairly strange life. 3 weeks later, she found the folder in the wrong drawer. What she read over the next 3 hours dismantled everything she thought she understood about the debt, about her father, about why she was here. Her father had not simply borrowed money. For 6 years, he had been a financial ghost accountant, processing money through legitimate-seeming transactions to clean it for criminal syndicates, operating between West Africa and East Asia. And the execution she had stumbled into in that boardroom was not random. The man killed was her father's handler. Her father had been present as a witness. Her father had known she was coming that day, He had not warned her. Buried deeper. Her biomedical engineering scholarship, the one she had applied for, competed for, agonized over, had been funded through a private Hansung Group endowment established 18 months ago. Before the debt, before the boardroom, before any of this. So Jihoon had funded her scholarship. Before they met, she found him in the study. His eyes went immediately to the folder. Adaeze, you funded my scholarship 18 months ago, before my father owed you anything. Why? He came around the desk to her with the deliberateness of a man who has decided that a thing must be said and will not allow himself to retreat from it. Jihoon, I saw you 14 months ago at Itaewon subway station. You were giving food to migrant workers, Nigerian, Ghanaian, Senegalese. You spent your own money. You were laughing while you did it, even though you clearly didn't have much to spare. I was in a car stuck in traffic. I saw you through the window for approximately 2 minutes before the car moved. Her breath had gone shallow. Jihoon, I told myself it was nothing. I filed it away. 3 weeks later, I had my people look into you. I told myself it was due diligence. It was not. I simply could not stop thinking about your face. When I learned everything in 48 hours, the scholarship gap, the 3 jobs, I established the endowment and closed the file. Then I hired someone to physically remove the file from my office and archive it off-site, because I found myself opening it too often. Adaeze. And then, Jihoon. It worked for approximately 6 weeks. Then I had it retrieved. I am not a man who loses control of his own attention. It was uncomfortable. I did not know what to do with something I could not manage. So I did nothing. For 14 months, I did nothing. And then your father's situation became critical, and I discovered who his daughter was. Adaeze, you hired someone to make you forget about me. Jihoon, yes. Adaeze, it didn't work. Jihoon, no. A long silence. Adaeze, the contract, the marriage, was any of that actually about the debt? Jihoon, the debt was real. The contract was an opportunity to keep you close, to keep you safe. Hak, you are carrying encrypted evidence in a research data file embedded in your scholarship materials without your knowledge. 3 organizations want it. 2 are willing to kill for it. Adaeze, you could have just told me I was in danger. Jihoon, you would have run. Adaeze, yes, I would have. Jihoon, and they would have found you within a week, alone, without resources, and he stopped. Jihoon, I was not willing to allow that. She walked to the rooftop garden and stood in the Seoul night and tried to sort through the enormous tangle of feelings rising in her chest. Fury, betrayal, gratitude, and underneath all of it, something warm and deeply inconvenient she absolutely refused to name. He had tried to forget her, failed, and then built an entire architecture of consequence around keeping her alive. She wasn't sure if that was the most terrifying thing anyone had ever done for her, or the most devastating. It was both. Comment below. Would you have signed that contract? Let K-Diaspora know. His name was Seo Dae-jung, first lieutenant for 11 years, the man who had enabled Jihoon's quiet dismantling of his father's criminal architecture from the inside, the only person alive who knew every version of what Kang Jihoon had been. He came to the penthouse on a Wednesday evening, and Jihoon stood in the kitchen with his hands folded on the counter, the way he folded them when he was exercising deliberate calm. Dae-jung, the Russian group traced the scholarship endowment, and they know it was personal. They don't need to threaten her life. They just need to make the association public. The board will call it a liability. 3 partners have already had conversations I was not supposed to hear. Jihoon, I know about the conversations. Dae-jung, and you're not moving. Jihoon, no. Dae-jung set his glass down. He was 53 years old, silver-streaked hair, the face of a man who had seen the inside of every difficult decision and still emerged believing that survival was its own form of integrity. Dae-jung, I have watched you make cold choices for 11 years. I have respected every one of them. But what you are doing now, this is sentiment dressed as strategy, and I cannot cover that for you. Jihoon, I am not asking you to cover anything. Dae-jung, then what are you asking? Jihoon, nothing. I am asking you to do nothing. A long silence. Dae-jung, you chose sentiment. I chose survival. Those two things are no longer compatible in the same organization. He stood, straightened his jacket with the care of a man who has made a decision and intends to execute it cleanly. Then he paused. He looked toward the hallway, toward the wing where Adaeze was working late, the faint light visible under her door. Dae-jung, Miss Nwosu. She appeared in the doorway. She had heard. She looked at Dae-jung without flinching. He studied her for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket and set a card on the counter. A phone number. A name below it. A senior prosecutor at the National Intelligence Service. Dae-jung, if you call that number in the next 72 hours, they will extract you cleanly. Financial settlement. Safe passage to London or Lagos. Clean record, no connection to any of this. Your career continues unaffected. Your thesis publishes on schedule. He looked at her directly. Dae-jung, he will not stop you. I will ensure it. You have my word. The room was absolutely still. Jihoon did not move. He did not look at her. He stared at the counter and waited. Adaeze looked at the card. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at Dae-jung. Adaeze, I appreciate that you believe you're protecting me, but I didn't come back to Lagos to run from a difficult room, and I didn't sign that contract to be someone who leaves when the cost gets real. I know what I'm standing in. I'm standing in it on purpose. Dae-jung looked at her for a moment, not with approval exactly, but with a particular form of respect that had nothing to do with liking someone. Dae-jung, then God help you both. He walked out. Jihoon stood in the kitchen for a long time after the elevator doors closed. He had known when he made his choice that it would cost him something. He had not known it would cost him this. The 11 years of the one man who had seen every version of him and stayed anyway. He picked up the card from the counter and looked at it. Jihoon, you didn't have to do that. Adaeze, I know. Jihoon, why? She crossed the kitchen and took the card from his hand and set it in the drawer. Not thrown away, just placed. Adaeze, because I chose this. That means something. At least it means something to me. He looked at her with the face she was beginning to recognize as the truest version of him. No wall, no cold, just the thing underneath. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The pharmaceutical package arrived on a Thursday morning. Standard diplomatic courier, addressed to Jihoon personally. Inside, printed financial disclosures, each surface coated with a contact-absorbed compound designed to present as cardiac arrest in a man operating on 4 hours of sleep. The assemblyman could not stop the prosecutors. He could not reclaim the data. What he could do was remove the witness before the case was formally presented. Jihoon opened the package at 11 a.m. By 4 p.m., he was gray. She noticed before his security team did. She was reviewing thesis data in the kitchen when she heard him in the corridor. Not the sound of him exactly, but the absence of his usual precision. One step slightly off. She was in the doorway before she had decided to move. Adaeze, stop, look at me. His pupils were unequal, 1 millimeter of asymmetry. Most people would never register it. She registered it because she had spent 8 months studying cellular biomarkers and neurological response patterns, and she had examined enough clinical data to know exactly what that asymmetry meant. Something had been introduced. Adaeze, sit down, right now. Jihoon, I have a call in 20. Adaeze, Jihoon, sit down. He sat. She did not panic. She had learned in every lab she had ever worked in that panic was the first thing you expelled from your body before you began. She ran through symptom onset, cross-referencing against 12 known contact absorption compounds used by syndicates operating in the region. She had written a literature review on exactly this for her second-year pharmacology module, and the human brain under sufficient pressure retrieves what it needs. She had him stable within 40 minutes. She called her university's toxicology department head, who owed her a favor for 2 years of shared research data, and walked him through her assessment in precise technical language, while Jihoon sat in the kitchen chair and watched her with the expression of a man who has fundamentally underestimated someone. Toxicologist. The compound you're describing, that's institutional, not street level. Adaeze. I know. I need the full antigen protocol, and I'll administer it myself. 2 hours later, the color had returned to Jihoon's face. His security team stood outside the kitchen door, informed of the situation 12 minutes after she had it contained, because she had contained it first. Jihoon, you knew. Adaeze, I suspected. Your pupils were asymmetric by 1 millimeter. Most people would have missed it. Jihoon, but you didn't. Adaeze, I study biomarkers for a living. Detecting what shouldn't be there is literally my field. He was quiet for a long moment. Jihoon, I have 15 security staff, a private physician, and a 7-figure threat assessment system. And you, Adaeze, and I noticed your eyes. Yes. His hand found hers under the table. He did not speak. She did not ask him to. The next morning, the delivery was traced. The assemblyman had one move left. The same data, a different vector. He sent a falsified pharmaceutical data set into a Hansung medical subsidiary shipment scheduled for distribution across 3 Seoul hospital districts. The falsified pharmacokinetic curves would suppress a contraindication flag. Patients with high-risk cardiac profiles would receive a compound that would accelerate deterioration. By the time anyone connected it to the shipment, the documentation trail would point to Hansung's negligence, destroying the prosecution case and Jihoon's empire simultaneously. The government customs review would close in 6 hours. Jihoon explained this to her in 3 sentences. Then he waited. Adaeze, get me the original trial submission files, the raw pharmacokinetic curves from the compound's approval application, and a secure terminal that can't be monitored. He got her everything within 22 minutes. What followed was the 6 hours that Jihoon Kang would never fully describe to anyone who asked, because he was not certain he had the language for what it was like to watch someone work at the absolute edge of their expertise in complete silence, with everything on the line. She did not talk while she worked. She moved through data sets the way she moved through a room. Direct, purposeful, assessing for relevance. 3 monitors. Cross-referencing pharmacokinetic curves against original trial data. In the 4th hour, she found it. The half-life curves were scaled by a factor of 0.73 across the entire data set. Not a data entry error. A systematic transformation applied after the fact, after submission, using a tool that generated a signature she could isolate. Adaeze, the original values are still recoverable from the metadata timestamps. I can prove the transformation was applied 11 days after the submission was filed. Whether that proves external access depends on whether your legal team can match the signature to a known actor. Jihoon, they can. If you give me the signature. Adaeze, give me 40 minutes. She gave it to him in 38. The legal submission reached the customs inspector with 4 minutes to spare. The shipment was quarantined. The falsified data was flagged as externally tampered. Sure, the narrative reversed. Jihoon stood in the doorway of her workspace and watched her close the final window on the terminal. Jihoon, how did you know where to look? Adaeze, pharmacokinetic manipulation is a known fraud vector in pharmaceutical approval submissions. I wrote a paper on it in 2nd year. I never thought I would need it for something like this. Jihoon, I have 15 legal analysts and a forensic accounting team. Adaeze, none of them would have looked at the half-life curves. They would have looked at the financial documentation. The attack was designed for people who think in money, not in molecules. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Jihoon, I have started reconsidering outcomes I previously found acceptable. She looked at him. That sentence was cold language. But she heard what was underneath it very clearly. Adaeze, what outcomes? Jihoon, the assumption that protection and control are the same thing. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at him. Adaeze, that is a very significant reconsideration. Jihoon, yes. 3 days later, she came to him at the kitchen table at 11 in the evening. Adaeze, if I stay, I become part of this. Not because you put me in danger. I understand the danger was already there. But I become part of the architecture. Your decisions, your enemies, your consequences. I didn't choose that. I signed a contract for a year. The year is almost over. Jihoon, yes. Adaeze, I'm not asking for reassurance. I'm telling you what I see. Jihoon, I know. A long pause. Adaeze, what do you want to say? He looked at her with the unguarded face. No wall, no distance. Jihoon, then you should go. She stared at him. Jihoon, I am not going to construct reasons for you to stay. You walked into a boardroom to negotiate your father's life. You solved a pharmaceutical fraud in 6 hours that 11 lawyers missed. You are not someone who needs a reason to stay if she has decided to leave. So if you want to leave, leave, Adaeze. You'd let me, Jihoon. There are no guards on the door tonight. There have not been guards on the door in 3 weeks. You know that. She did know that. She had known it without fully acknowledging it. She stood up. She walked to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and listened to Seoul breathe 47 floors below. She thought about Enugu, her mother. She thought about 6 hours at a terminal, with finding the thing that everyone else had been too anchored in their own expertise to find. She thought about a man who had tried to forget her, failed, and then instead of manipulating her into staying, had simply opened the door. She sat there for a long time. Then she walked back to the kitchen. He had not moved. She sat back down. Adaeze, I'm staying. Jihoon, why? Adaeze, because you opened the door. And that's the first time anyone has done that. He picked up his documents and continued reading. She pulled her laptop toward her and continued writing her thesis. They did not speak for another hour. They did not need to. Her father was recovered 3 days later, unharmed. When he saw her in the doorway, he could not meet her eyes. She did not rage at him. All she felt was a bone-deep grief. Adaeze, bah, look at me. He looked up. His eyes were wet. Father, Ada, I should have protected you instead of... Adaeze, yes, you should have, but you didn't, and we are here now. Father, this man, Jihoon, is he... Adaeze, he is the reason you are alive right now. That is all I'm going to say about it tonight. She arranged for her father to be taken back to Lagos with a security detail Jihoon provided without being asked. She watched the car disappear around the curve of the mountain road and exhaled a breath she had been holding, it felt, for months. 3 days later, she booked a flight. She told herself it was rational. The data file was with prosecutors. The assemblyman was in custody. 7 officials arrested. The danger was receding. She had chosen to stay once. That did not mean she was required to stay forever. The contract was over. She could go home. She packed efficiently, left a note on the kitchen counter, took a taxi to Incheon. The terminal was busy. A Tuesday afternoon, the vast, indifferent machinery of modern travel processing thousands of lives per hour. She had her boarding pass. She had found her gate. She was sitting in the departure lounge telling herself this was right. This was the sensible thing. And this was, every screen in the terminal went dark. Not gradually, all at once. Then the lights flickered. People looked up from their phones. Gate agents reached for radios. She was already looking toward the main concourse entrance when she saw the men in dark coats come in, not running, walking, with the measured pace of people who know exactly where they are going, and nothing is going to stop them getting there. And behind them, Jihoon. Well, he walked through the controlled chaos of the terminal as if the world had been arranged around his route and was merely confirming it. He found her. Of course he found her. He came to a stop in front of her. Then Kang Jihoon, the most feared man in Asia's criminal underworld, went to one knee. Not dramatically, not as a performance. As a man who had decided that the ordinary standing height was not the right posture for this particular truth. Jihoon, did you truly think I would let the world have you? Adaeze, the contract is over. The debt is cleared. The data is with the prosecutors. You don't need me here anymore. Jihoon, the contract was never why I wanted you here. Adaeze, you manipulated the situation. You used my father's debt, Jihoon. Yes. Flat. Unapologetic. Jihoon, I used the situation. I will not pretend I didn't. I saw you giving food to strangers on a rainy night, and I had been living inside a world where everyone wanted something from me, and no one ever simply chose to be kind without calculating the return. And you were just kind. Without calculation, I did not know what to do with it. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I am not proud of it. Adaeze, you should have just talked to me, like a human being. Jihoon, I know. Adaeze, you should have said, Yes, I saw you at a subway station, and I haven't stopped thinking about you. Jihoon, I saw you at a subway station, and I haven't stopped thinking about you. The words delivered quietly and precisely in the flickering light of the departure terminal with 100 people moving past them landed on her like something final. Jihoon, you are the first person in years who looked at me without fear or calculation. You walked into a boardroom where men were on their knees, and you negotiated. You cooked jollof rice at midnight and didn't apologize for taking up space. You found a pharmaceutical fraud in 6 hours that 11 lawyers missed. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. I thought I was protecting you, but you were the thing that was making me want to be better than what I am. She looked at his face, at the carefully composed features and the almost imperceptible tension in his jaw. The only outward sign that Kang Jihoon was underneath everything, terrified. She sat down on her heels so they were level. She took his face in her hands. Adaeze, you are an impossible, infuriating, controlling, extraordinary man. Jihoon, I know. Adaeze, if you ever engineer my life circumstances without telling me again, I will leave, and I will not come back. Jihoon, I know. Adaeze, and I am going to need chamomile tea in the apartment at all times. Something broke open in his face, that almost smile becoming finally in an actual one, quiet and private and more devastating than she had been prepared for. Jihoon, that I can arrange. 3 founding partners left Hansung Group's inner board in the weeks that followed, men who had been with his father before him, men whose loyalty he had inherited like furniture. 2 major construction contracts were voided. A Japanese investment consortium suspended their relationship pending a review everyone understood would last indefinitely. The public stock dropped 17% over 4 weeks before stabilizing. The empire was not destroyed, but it was smaller than it had been, and it would take years to rebuild what had been lost. And he had known, at the exact moment he cooperated with prosecutors, that this was the cost. He paid it without negotiating. One evening, 3 weeks before her thesis defense, she found him at the kitchen table with financial reports spread in front of him. Adaeze, was it worth it? What you gave up? Jihoon, I built half of what I had on foundations I knew were compromised. Now the loss is appropriate. Adaeze, that's not an answer. Another pause. Jihoon, yes, it was worth it. She believed him. She also understood what that sentence cost a man who had spent his entire life measuring every outcome before committing to it. Her thesis defense was in April, cherry blossom season, the examination committee calling her research on sickle cell biomarkers in West African populations the most significant original work to come through the lab in a decade. She walked out into the April afternoon and called her father. Father, Ada, how did it? Adaeze, first class, ba, he cried, right there on the phone. She stood in the cherry blossom afternoon and let him. Jihoon was waiting outside the hall gates, leaning against the stone wall in a dark coat, as if he regularly stood outside university examination halls on spring afternoons. Jihoon, you passed. Adaeze, first class. Jihoon, I expected nothing less. She looked at him. Really looked. Or the way she allowed herself to do now without the shield of wariness she had carried for so long. Adaeze, the contract, the marriage, you said at the end of the year. Jihoon, yes. Adaeze, are you going to hold me to it? He turned to face her fully. In the cherry blossom light, petals falling around them, Kang Jihoon looked at her with that unguarded face she had come to know as the truest version of him. Jihoon, I am going to ask you, not hold you to anything. Ask you. As the man who watched you for 2 minutes at Itaewon Station and has not had a quiet mind since. As the man who put chamomile tea in the kitchen because it reminds you of home. As the man who is, I have started reconsidering outcomes I previously found acceptable. You are the reason for that reconsideration. That is the only case I have to make. Adaeze, that's a terrible negotiating position. Jihoon, I know. I am choosing not to negotiate. She looked at the cherry blossoms falling. She thought about Enugu and Lagos and a scholarship she had fought for without knowing someone was already making sure she could keep it. She thought about chamomile tea at midnight and a whiteboard in a kitchen and a man going to one knee in Incheon Airport while the screens went dark. She thought about an open door with no guards on it and the choice she had made to walk back through it on her own terms. She thought about what he had said to her weeks ago when she had finally asked him why. Jihoon, because the world treats diamonds carefully, but gold, they bury. I refuse to let them bury you. She had not answered him then. She had an answer now. Adaeze. Ask me then. Jihoon. Adaeze Nwosu. Will you stay? She took his hand. In the spring afternoon with the cherry blossoms coming down around them, like something the city was offering as witness. Adaeze. I'll stay. Not because of a contract, not because of a debt, not because of fear or calculation or the careful engineering of circumstances, because she chose to, because he had, in the end, given her that, the choice, the truth, himself without the armor, because gold does not bury itself. It waits in the earth for someone willing to dig. The wedding was small, a courtyard in Gangnam decorated with aso-oke fabric flown in from Lagos, and marigold, her mother's flower, wound through every surface. Her father walked her in. He was thinner than he had been, quieter, working hard day by day to become the man his daughter deserved him to be. She saw him trying. It was enough. Jihoon stood at the end of the courtyard in a dark suit with a single marigold in the lapel. He had put it there himself. She did not ask who told him. As she suspected, no one did. The silver pen sat on the table in the bridal room where she dressed. He had couriered it back to her the week before without explanation. She understood. It was where this had begun. It deserved to be present at what came after. The ceremony was in English and Korean and Igbo because she had asked for all three, and he had learned the Igbo phrases phonetically in the preceding weeks, practicing in the kitchen while she pretended not to hear him, because she had heard every word. After the ceremony, after the jollof rice, after the dancing, she found him on the rooftop looking at the city. Adaeze. What are you thinking about? He turned to look at her in her aso-oke, and her mother's earrings and the marigolds in her braids, his face entirely open. No armor, no distance. Jihoon, 2 minutes at Itaewon Station, and all of this. It was past midnight when his phone vibrated. She felt it, the slight tension that moved through him. She had learned to read those signals the way she read her data, with patience, with the understanding that the smallest variation was often the most significant. He looked at the screen. His face did not change. That was how she knew it was serious. Adaeze. What is it? He turned the phone so she could see. A single message. No name. 4 words. The file was copied. The prosecution had the data. 7 officials were in custody. The assemblyman was awaiting trial. Because she had believed, they had both believed, that the architecture of the threat had been dismantled. But somewhere before containment, a copy had been made, which meant the data still existed in unauthorized hands, which meant the men who wanted it were not finished, which meant this, all of this, the debt and the boardroom and the airport and the marigolds and the vows, was not an ending. It was a beginning of something they could not yet name. She straightened, took the phone from his hand, and read the message, set it down on the railing. Adaeze. Okay. He looked at her. 1 word. No flinch, no panic. Jihoon, you understand what this means. Adaeze. It means it isn't over. Yes, I understand. Jihoon. I can. Adaeze. We, not I. We. That's the entire point of tonight, in case the ceremony was unclear. Something broke open in his face. That quiet, private, devastating smile. Jihoon. We then. She took his hand. Soul spread below them. Enormous, indifferent, alive, and full of the next thing and the thing after that. The investigation was ongoing. His empire was smaller than it had been. She had turned down his financial settlement and was building her own research post at Seoul National University's biomedical faculty. She had refused to be bought even by the man she had chosen. They remained together by decision, not by resolution. Love existed. Safety did not. And yet, She was standing on a rooftop in Seoul in her mother's earrings, holding the hand of a man who had chosen consequence over comfort, who had paid real prices for real choices, who had opened the door and waited without manipulating the outcome. She had come back through it on her own. Gold does not bury itself. It waits in the earth for someone willing to dig. They had found each other. What came next? They would face it the same way they had faced everything else. Together, unsettled, and unfinished, and entirely, stubbornly alive. If this story moved you, like this video. It tells us to keep these stories coming. Subscribe to K-Diaspora, new Afro-Han romance stories every week. You won't find stories like this anywhere else. Comment, what hit you hardest? Daejung's offer? The 6-hour clock? The open door with no guards? That midnight message on the wedding night? Tell us below. K-Diaspora, where African hearts meet Korean worlds.